Hello, and welcome to the Dissidents podcast, where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. Welcome to the Dissidents podcast with me, Jennifer Richmond, my co-host Winkfield Twyman Jr., and today we are with Susanna McIntyre. We met Susanna at the Empowered Ed Leadership Summit that the Coalition for Empowered Education put on. She is working with the AHA, the Ayan Hirsi Ali Foundation. But that's not really, we might talk about that a little bit, but here's Susanna. This is where I want to get started. So I was running around during that conference. I had, all the stuff to do, the management and organization. And Wink stops me. He goes, "Oh my gosh, have you talked to Susanna?" And I'm like, I mean, yes, hello, whatever.
Yeah.
He goes, "No, you need to talk to Susanna." So what I'd like to start, and how Wink and I usually start anyways, is asking you your origin story. And by that, it's
Yes.
like how you've kind of come to be who you are today on this podcast, who you are as, someone who came to the Empowered Ed Leadership Summit as part of AHA. Apparently, and I see this also because you were on the Free Speech Forward podcast. You have got
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
a storyline. So what is your origin story, Susanna?
Please tell us.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, it depends on how far back you want to go. I guess why people like you find me and my story interesting is because I had a little bit of a stint in Antifa during my early 20s. And then what I've done since then oftentimes intrigues people. Like in my personal life, I run my own nonprofit, the Atheist Republic. It's one of the largest online communities of atheists in the world, and we have a particular focus on ex-Muslim issues. And so that's like a really unique population, and they deal with very specific problems and that overlay very well with a lot of the issues that I know consume your mind and regarding like bad minority representation, the treatment of people who are dissidents. There's a lot of strong crossover. Wokeism, a lot of strong crossover. So a lot of people also find like that interesting. But a lot of people, when they're like, "You were in Antifa? Like, what the hell? Like, what happened?" Especially because nowadays I'm kind of in cultural spaces that are the exact opposite, right? Like, actively fighting those people. So they're like, "How did you end up here?"
Yeah.
I mean, sensible question.
Mhm.
To put things simply, I was raised in a conservative Catholic family, and I have always kind of been like a black sheep. And I was never very good at being a good little Catholic schoolgirl. And when I was around the age of 14, I came to understand my attraction as, oh, I'm bisexual. And that combined with many other things in the world that I found interesting or intriguing or that I wanted to investigate were like very clearly not allowed, taboo, or stigmatized. And I felt that stigma, I felt that rejection. And any young person in a scenario like that quite typically decides to rebel because they're like, I feel that the messages and structure around me is making me feel very negative towards myself. So the way I describe it is like I kind of had a choice where I can accept those structures and then feel like very negatively about myself, or I could reject all of them, or as my therapist would say, she once described it as I chose to burn down the church, and reject all of it and rebel and begin to more cognitively thrive. So that was kind of like the direction of how things went. And I had a difficult adolescence. I I mean, definitely not the worst in comparison to a lot of other people I know.
Right.
But in my life, it was very hard. And it was probably difficult for my parents and my family. But that experience led me in a very specific direction. Basically, if you're like, a gay kid or bisexual kid, whatever, in like a conservative environment, especially as a teenager, you look at who is in the environment who's more validating and accepting. And like very easily and obviously, that's going to be people on the left. And especially like in my day and age, like I'm getting old.
Oh, you're young. You're young.
Like this is before gay marriage was legalized in my state. This is before it was federally recognized. Like these kids have it so easy nowadays. I remember real homophobia, you guys. And so obviously that informed my experience a lot. And so I went running in that direction, and I enter college and I want to study psychology. I want to be a therapist, and I want to be a therapist for like LGBT teens. So I end up doing a minor in critical sexuality and gender studies, thinking that I just learn more about how to work with this population, not realizing until later it's just critical theory indoctrination all the way down.
Right.
And around that time, when I was 21 was when Trump first got elected. And when I woke up that morning and Trump was the president-elect, it literally like broke my brain. Like I don't know if I've felt anything like this before, where I was literally like, it was so out of left field for me and a lot of people that I was legitimately sitting there like, am I certain this is reality? Because what I believed to be most probable was so like resoundingly rejected. Like, what the hell just happened?
Did that cause you to question the echo chamber you were in at the time, or not? Maybe it did.
No, I doubled down.
So there you go. I like it. I love it.
So then, I'm finishing out my undergraduate career, and then this is when the, infamous so-called kids in cages policies was in full swing. Now I know a lot more, and a lot of these policies preceded Trump. At the time, that didn't matter. So I got involved in the kind of abolish ICE movement. And this was also heavily influenced by the fact that given my degree in psychology and my study of cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, knowing how the separation of those children from those guardians, it like physically changes you in a way that can never be undone. And I was in the depths of like studying those consequences in my education, and then seeing it play out in front of me, like it broke me. Like I couldn't tolerate it. And I had this sense, granted, I am a full legal adult at the time, but especially when you're in your undergrad and college, you don't feel like an adult the way that everyone else in the world feels like an adult. And I think we can all like understand what that feeling is like, right? You're still kind of in school. You're still almost incubating in a sense. And I couldn't conceive of how all the adults around me like allowed this to happen. It's like, how can you allow this to happen? Because there's a part of my brain that's going, literally, if enough of us just went up and did something, they couldn't stop us. But it's obviously not that easy. So I was in this midst of being a young adult, in the depths of where you're having these episodes of identity formation and looking at this grievous injustice and harm that I felt so moved by, and the lack of action of people in power or just the average citizen. And in the face of that, in my youthful zeal, I looked around and I was like, well, who's doing something about this? Well, going to college in the Bay Area, like, we have a lot of Antifa activity, and they're the ones doing something about it. You know, like, what I try to express to people is you can say a lot, but these are people who are willing to put like boots behind what they believe in, whether or not you agree with their belief, right? And seeing that was very powerful to my young mind. I was like, holy cow, like, they're willing to put like fists behind what they believe in. And everyone else just seems to be willing to watch this happen. Like, that's insane to me. So I basically got involved in that scene with a bunch of my friends who were pursuing degrees at my college, and it was kind of like a thing we did as a group. And that involved a lot of different stuff, including basically like a occupation of the DHS building in downtown San Francisco, where a whole group of people shut down a block in front of that building for a week. And so there weren't any people coming in and out of that office for a week. Now, I'm sure they were working remotely, but so be it. And that was a really informative experience. And through a long series of events, I ended up like coming out of that way of thinking, and then really understanding how, while I was involved in a more like militant fringe, the implications of that entire system of thought is like way farther reaching consequences that we now see today, you know, extending into people who have positions of influence over education, of all levels of education. And kind of, I got involved in just talking about my experience and talking about why I find this way of approaching problems to be so dangerous, and a lot of
your
different things.
did your friends and colleagues accept your questioning of the premises, of the assumptions? Just curious.
No, and to be fair, a lot of that was because I cut them out of that evolution. So when I was starting to leave this whole kind of group and movement, I was in one of the worst periods of mental unwellness in my life. And partially that was because of several friendships being quite toxic and not actually being friendships. And so I have the kind of personality where in certain crises, like, I rescind into myself. I become very isolated. I can really hermit.
You're an
And so I kind of went
introvert.
into one of those periods where I really hermited, and I would just spend time reading. And I started reading this book about cult psychology, basically from a cult survivor.
Well, let's stop right there. So you began to read the book about cult psychology, but that presupposes a certain, if you will, open-mindedness to different perspectives. Why do you think you were able to have that open-mindedness, even though you were in a group that could fairly be cast as very closed-minded, right?
Well, okay, long story short, I didn't. So basically, coming from a Catholic family, like, I had a extreme amount of shame about my sexuality. And a lot of people would assume that it's, oh, because you're bisexual or whatever. Like, I wasn't actually so much about that. It was actually more focused about my attraction to men, or just being a woman with sexual attraction at all. Like, it was so deeply shameful. Like, I can't even, it was like this 1,000-pound backpack of shame and self-loathing that was really having a day-to-day negative effect and impact on my life. But I would sit there and I'd be like, well, Susanna, like, you don't actually believe a lot of these judgments that you have against yourself. Like, I would never believe a lot of these judgments that I had, like about one of my friends, I would think that's horrible. I don't think that's right. It was a disconnect between what I believed intellectually and what I believed emotionally.
Mhm.
And so basically I was in a process of trying to like address this really deep like hurt within myself. And I was like, and I've always been fascinated by cults and psychology, obviously. And so I started to read the book hoping to understand that element of like pain or just that thing that I needed to work on, right? And the funny thing was, while I thought I was like addressing this issue over here, like the pattern recognition in my brain could not help but notice a few glaring red signals going over here. And so you're like, oh, it shows some open-mindedness. Well, not exactly, because it was critical thought that like got in through the back door, as I would say. Because I wasn't trying to be open-minded about this stuff. I was trying to fix my other
problems,
psychological issues over here.
Unforeseeable consequences.
Yeah, exactly. And in one of the books I was reading, it really was about teaching me critical thinking in a structured way. And so one of those exercises is almost like a Cartesian exercise where he talks about taking the apple barrel of your mind and pouring out all the apples on the floor and examining each one individually to see if there's any that are rotten. Because if one is rotten, it could rot the whole bucket. And I was like, well, Susanna, I mean, I'm a really educated, intelligent young woman, and I think I totally only believe true things. And another thing I learned in the book is that truth will always stand under scrutiny. Truth will always stand under scrutiny. So if I really believe all these super true things, then me examining them and looking for critical evidence or whatever, criticism, it shouldn't matter because it will be true no matter what other criticism there is.
Right.
So I began that process, and then I realized that I had a lot of bad beliefs. But going back to like the whole thing about my friends, and this is something I do have some regrets over because I think I could have actually been a better friend to them. But also I was really not doing well, so I understand like why my behavior was not the best. But basically I kind of cut them out of most of this evolution because I feared that any of my criticism or questions or alternative thoughts would essentially be an instant mark against my moral character. And I knew that I would be construed in basically the lens of me having prejudices and privileges because I was like the only white girl in the group. And I knew how that was going to go because I know how other conversations and interactions had gone. And or even towards third parties, you know, and how that had played out and the judgments that were made about those other parties. And I'm like, well, the same thing's going to happen to me. Like, I know how this is going to go down. So I didn't include them in that evolution because I feared the rejection, quite honestly.
Yeah.
And
although if you think about it, we can think about it now with farsight and distance, if you really were that vulnerable to being stigmatized because of your thinking process, were they really quote unquote true friends? Right? But that's easy to say now, you know, weeks and days and months later. Yeah. So.
And I mean, these are people that I've fallen out of contact with. I mean, some even sent me cease and desists.
Good Lord. Oh my Lord.
I'm like, this isn't legally binding, but okay. So I mean, I want to give a little bit of grace to like how we're all super messy during that age range. It really is a kind of a continuation of like high school behaviors in their own ways. And I wasn't the best friend to them during that time either, you know? Like,
Yeah.
a real friend from my end would have also been open and honest in that sense. And you know, through my own personal feelings at that time, like I wasn't. So I don't want to make it like about them not being a real friend or whatever, because we actually did go through some really difficult times together that we supported each other through. It's just things didn't end well, and you know, it is what it is. But ultimately, that did teach me, to get back to your point, like really valuable lessons about the kind of environments that I do want to maintain in my friendships. And that's really guided my life.
Because one of the things that I take away from this is because my experience was so different from yours. I was in my early 20s in Charlottesville, Virginia, back in the early 1980s. So it's like almost a universe away from your experience. But one of the things that so saddened me is that as you came of age, my senses that certain dogmas and slogan words and things that people had to say and believe was just part of the backdrop. It was just part of your ecosystem. That in fact, it may have been a rare professor who said it was okay to be a nonconformer. It's okay to be a creative thinker. It's okay to be a dissident. Was there any space in your coming of age when you felt you could freely be yourself and think whatever thoughts you wanted to thought? Or were you always, in a sense, a captive of that ecosystem?
I mean, it's almost difficult to say because I thought I was being myself. You know? And to an extent I was. I mean, I just have the personality type where I have very strong convictions, and whatever is my conviction at that time, I'm going to go full steam on it.
So,
I
understand totally.
I mean,
I get that.
That has remained true. I was being myself in that. I think it's tough. I think it's a journey of finding myself in going from one extreme to another to figure out where I want to be and what sounds more right. You know, I went from, and that's actually a very interesting comparison. You know, so sorry, I'm kind of going a little off script, but one of the reasons why I started to have such a strong rejection of the domineering and judgmental behaviors and environments that I was in is because I grew up Catholic and I dealt with the shame and guilt of sin like since I was so young. And eventually I realized, I was like, holy crap, I'm in a Puritan environment again. And I'm worried about the group seeing me sinning like all over again. Like this is exactly what I was trying to get away from. This isn't what I came here for. I thought I was coming here for something different, for more validation, for more acceptance. And it's just, you know, the same problem. But what makes it even worse is that like I can find no salvation for my sins in this system. There, you know, at least I used to have Jesus, okay? The blood of Christ will wash away all my sins.
That's
but I have no Jesus here. I'm just a white girl and I can never get away from being a white girl.
That's the quote of the day.
Yeah, and that will, and no matter what I do to self-flagellate, like that at any time, no matter what works I give, like will be weaponized against me at any given point in the future. And so at a certain point, I just realized, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take myself out then. If I'm just, if I know that this could always be used against me, then I might as well go be as messy and problematic as you have already judged me to be. Like my friends would openly talk about in front of my face, like, you know, white people will always betray you. White people will always disappoint you.
Was that pure performance theater?
No, I think they really believe that.
They really believe that.
I really think they believe that. And then I had my own journey, and I'm like, I know they're saying it about me. I know they're saying it about me.
Right.
Because I tried so hard to be the good one. And I broke the bad ones.
So they were incapable of seeing the individual Susanna below the surface color of race. They just couldn't see the individual you, correct?
Yes, and I literally had friends who were in my closer friend circle tell me that other girls in our larger friend circle literally did not like me because I'm white.
You know, Jen, take it away. I interrupted you. I'm just beside myself.
We need to come back here, but I feel like I'm missing a link in the story, so I just want to make sure that I'm up to speed. What I heard you say, so I saw your transition through Antifa. The watershed moment for you to start questioning this, was it that reading of the book, the reading on the cults? Like what was the watershed moment that you're like, something's not right?
Okay, so the book was the first step, because I started to actually think about critical thinking in like a structured, like systematic way, like a process.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I would go through this thing where I would, another thing that some of the literature I've read talks about is, before you go join a group, go seek out a former member of the group to go ask them about their experience. And so I would sit in my room, and then we're almost starting to get into like COVID times, not quite yet, but and I would go watch like atheist versus Christian debates, because I would sit there and I'd try to practice like identifying a logical fallacy. And but then, okay, this is where things get interesting. I'm like, if I am such a good ally, I need to be listening to the like marginalized minority voices, okay? Like there's so much more diversity here. Let's go listen to these other diverse voices. So I would take basically the same format, like X insert religion versus person from that religion. So I go X Muslim versus Muslim debate on YouTube and just go watch debates. Basically, I discovered the ex-Muslim community. And what I learned from that community was basically the watershed moment for me. Because it was like, one, I was allowed to listen to them because they had the right lived experience. So if Sam Harris was saying the same thing, that's evil and wrong and bad, and he's racist. But they can say this because essentially they have the right skin color, they have the right sounding name, they speak the right language, they have the right lived experience. So this is how critical thought gets in the back door. So they have all the right check boxes, okay? So I'm allowed to listen. And then I start listening, and I'm like, oh my God, I've never heard anything like this before. I joke that it was really like fish scales falling from my eyes, because what they had to say was so contrary to everything I had been allowed to hear at that point. From everything from their criticisms about Islam as a religion itself, their criticisms about social structures within their countries of origin, and how they are harmful, and we need to talk honestly about it and not make it blaming the West for our problems. Like, no, we actually have a legit problem ourselves. Or what really broke my brain was learning about blasphemy laws and apostasy laws. Like, I did not know that there were places in the world where you can be executed for blasphemy and apostasy. I literally did not know that. And when I found that out, and that there are people literally today facing execution for blasphemy, it outraged me. I was like, I can't believe this, especially someone coming from a faith journey. Now I'm an atheist, and just thinking like, they're not saying anything different than I would say about the faith I grew up in. But they are going to be killed for it. Like, that's insane to me. And where is the allyship? And that's what started to outrage me, was where is the allyship? Where is the support for these people? And then I cannot help but observe that these people speaking out against this had to make great sacrifices to come to a country where they can speak freely. And then they come to our societies, and then the mainstream people who are supposed to be so politically correct and for the sake of social justice are shutting them down in favor of empowering the most conservative elements within their communities that are doing things that are antithetical to the tenets of social justice. And seeing how they're getting stabbed in the back by their who should be their strongest allies, it just like it started to blow up everything for me, and I just started to consume and consume and consume because it felt like I had discovered something completely new. And so that really was the watershed moment for me.
Interesting. Is that how, I want to go back to some of your crazier stories, but is that how you got involved then with Ayan Hirsi Ali and her, because her story is one of, I believe an ex-Muslim, right? And,
Yeah.
having to deal with some of the more doctrinaire parts of that religion that when she came to, I believe it was the UK, right? That she was like, oh, this is something I have to speak out against.
Yeah, she was in the Netherlands first.
Netherlands.
So
Okay.
not exactly. So I basically ended up getting involved with the organization that I run now, Atheist Republic, first. And I did that for many years. I still do, almost 5 years now. And so that kind of like built up my experience and familiarity in this space, also like the challenges of operating a nonprofit and stuff. And working with triaging a bunch of cases of people like fleeing persecution, helping with recommendations for refugee cases and stuff, meeting countless friends where that's their experience. And because of me doing that, and this is just in my spare time, like outside of my full-time job, I got to meet like a lot of people. And then one of my friends is a fellow at the AHA Foundation. We have like a critical thinking fellowship. And she was visiting me, and then she was like, oh, at AHA they have a job opening right now, you should apply. And I was like, oh no, I'm not gonna get it, and basically several years later, that's kind of like a roundabout way of how I ended up there. But yeah, like Ayan herself is obviously like a giant in the ex-Muslim space. Everything is transformed so drastically, like 20 years on, because of what she's been through.
Right. And I mean, her story, everyone can look this up, so I'm not sharing any secrets, is one of genital mutilation, and that is still also practiced in many parts of the world too. So
yeah,
shocking stuff. So I think I took you off your game with questions for.
No problem. I was curious. How do we facilitate what I call the preference cascade? You might be familiar with that term.
Preference
Yes,
cascade.
I think
familiar
you
with
are.
like preference falsification. I'm guessing that this is the antidote.
Yeah. Or the desirable consequence, as it might be.
Yeah.
So preference falsification is simply where people say one thing, but they believe something different in private. And they sort of engage in a type of doublethink for the purposes of social acceptance, social accommodation, social survival. But the problem is, the more and more that people say one thing but really believe something else, the more and more you create a distorted reality for people, because the few true believers are loud and speak up and beat the drums. Most people may disagree or have their questions, but because of preference falsification, they remain silent. That's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at some point, and we saw this in 1970s in Prague, at some point, people who live in these kind of dogmatic regimes or echo chambers, they begin to all develop a sense that they're not alone, that other people also are doing the same thing. They're keeping quiet. They're saying one thing, but believing another. So when the tide shifts, when the winds blow in a different direction, all of a sudden you have this cascade of people who feel emboldened to really say that they object to dogma, that they do not believe the slogan words. And it develops in the nature of an avalanche of thought, which is why it's called a preference cascade. Because all at once people feel free to creatively express themselves, knowing that there are other people who are doing the same thing. So I guess my point is, what will it take for us to have a regime of preference cascade develop, where people are free to speak openly and more honestly about things like the limitations of dogma and slogan words and critical race theory and all the rest? Because I really do think that preference cascade is on the horizon. It's just a matter of time. What do you think?
I mean, personally, I think we're already in a preference cascade.
Talk to me, Susanna. Say more.
Well,
say
I
more.
mean, a large part of it had to do with like just the insane shovel out we saw during the election. I mean, I think a lot of that can also be attributed to the influence of inflation and how we're seeing incumbents across the world get overturned because of the pressures of inflation on their countries. So I think that has like a higher, as much as it's fun to talk about culture war stuff, I think that is like very highly responsible. But beyond that, I mean, the way that you hear most people explaining this, the show we saw in the election, is because of cultural factors. And on so many different levels, I think the attitude towards saying positive things about some of Trump's policies or some of the EOs that are coming out is just so different than it used to be. Like, it used to be all bad and just like, this is, I mean, when I was in Antifa, I literally believed, like, fully, it was my reality that I was living in a fascist country. So,
yes.
it doesn't, again, and maybe this is my echo chamber, it doesn't feel like that as much nowadays. There are now like very principled, maybe more like classical liberal people who would have had more reservations but now are more willing to be like, actually, this action does have a lot of merits. Actually, I can see a lot of the positives of this. Over here, we might be going a little bit more than my preference, but over there's some real merit. Like, I'm seeing more of that in the media. I think where we need to see a preference cascade the most, because especially among like the electorate, these ideas that are the most dogmatic are not being well supported nowadays. Like the NY Times put out a poll just a few days ago looking at what is support like for certain transgender issues.
Yeah.
And there is majority support across both parties and independents that they do not think that trans women should be in female sports. Or there is majority support that people think that like the trans issues have gone too far. And there is majority support that people do not think that there should be these medical interventions for children. Like, these are widely held beliefs. It's just the people that are running some establishments are out of sync. So I think that's where we need to see the preference cascade the most. And it's going to take some pressure, but I think it can be done. I mean, I think about the status of academia over the past like 4 or 5 years. I mean, was it the I can't remember the full name, but like the Association of Anthropology that literally shut down like a presentation because they were like referring to skeletons in sexed terms. Like, we can say whatever we want, but academia is a very slow moving beast.
Mhm.
And that instance that happened, I think about like maybe 2.5 years ago, that can only happen because of death by 1,000 cuts.
Mhm.
And so we have to ask ourselves, okay, like, I think we have had a major shift among what the population is willing to talk about more openly. But how do we now do death by 1,000 cuts to get our institutions back on track? And can it be done?
I think that's a great question. Yeah.
That's like a major concern of me. Like, there was some other anthropology event that got shut down for some really bizarre reason recently. And so, I mean, especially given, you know, the work that we've done in the past with the Empowered Ed Conference, like, that's something that I think about a lot, is kind of the control, the capture that they have of certain institutions. Because I think a lot of people have freed themselves from the fear of punishment that used to really tangibly exist.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's, with the education space, both K-12 and higher ed, I think that's going to be, you always use the word, slower moving. I think we are at a tipping point, but I think that's where some heels are going to be dug in, is in the academic. And I think a part of that is, you know, we talk a lot about generational change. I think some of the teachers that we have now that are still quite youthful have been taught in a certain way that until we kind of change that aspect of it, I think that there will, you know, they're in the system, unless we just overhaul the system, bring new people in, accredit, you know, new teachers in unique and novel ways, which we could do, but it would be a major overhaul. I think that we're going to continue to see that, and that's going to continue to impact our youth. And unless they have a transformative moment, Susanna, like you did. And here's what's so fascinating to me about your story, is this idea of critical thinking. I love how the critical thinking came in through the back door.
I always say that.
I mean, I think I relate a lot to what you said. I think I'm a smart woman, you know, but there's, so, you know, even like in my conversations with Wink and in the book that we wrote together, you know, I mean, he kind of had to knock me over the head a few times. And, you know, I was like, I was in some ways captured. So this critical thinking, I think, it really starts there. And we're not teaching critical thinking. You know, I mean, that is like not even on the books anymore. And so until we start to bring our children back into that mindset of, I love the fact that on your own, I mean, you talk about how it came in the back door, but you're the one who on your own went and found the debates, who went and sought out different voices. Like, that's not, I don't even see that happening, that curiosity where critical thinking could come in either the front or the back door. I think has been lost in many ways. And I think,
especially for me and my personality type, like, especially being like a black sheep in a religious family, like, I always got like a thrill out of like the taboo in like what I'm not allowed to do. Like, this isn't allowed. I don't have permission to do this. Like, this is a little naughty. And so I'd go look up like all these far right figures. Like, I'd go watch a Ben Shapiro video alone in my room and literally be like, oh my God, if anyone saw me doing this right now, I'd be like, basically almost thinking like I'd be in so much trouble. You know, like, I cannot describe to people, the only comparable experience is that it felt like sinning. But I was just, I couldn't help. I was just so curious. Like,
I have a theory. I wonder, Susanna, did being Catholic fuel your curiosity? In other words, if you had been simply an Episcopalian or a Presbyterian, would you have been as curious, you think?
I don't know. I think it had less to do with like the specific denomination and more the feeling and experience of being just so different and so othered. Like, and experiencing rejection and having to go find your own, you know,
Yeah.
and to be alone. Like I was very used to being mentally and emotionally alone. And so while it's like painful to go through again, it wasn't unfamiliar to me. And so I think I had kind of practice in a sense. I think like some of it is it has made me wary of certain kind of groups. Like I now find it easier to be friends with groups of men than I do to be friends with groups of women.
Why
Because
is that?
my
Why is that?
experience repeatedly in my life of when I have, because I didn't, when I was going through this difficulty in my adolescence, I didn't allow my family to be part of my emotional life. My friends became my emotional family. And then there were multiple instances throughout my development where I was ostracized from that group. And that was extremely shattering. And then this like last big time, me going through my whole Antifa experience was like probably one of the worst of all, where for years I would still dream about these people. Because to me, they were my emotional family, and I was like losing a family again. And so that experience has unfortunately taught me, and all those instances were with groups of exclusively girlfriends, that it is emotionally safer for me to not be in friendship with a group of women, because they're more likely, because women we're so focused, our personality type, on temperament, on being agreeable, that agreement is a condition of friendship.
Oh, that's
oftentimes
deep. That is so deep. That is so deep.
And that disagreement is often a signal for a mark against your moral character,
as opposed to something to be celebrated, a part of intellectual life.
And so one of my primary values that I hold in relationships nowadays is that agreement is not a condition of friendship.
Excellent.
And so unfortunately that experience has just like led me to seek out like more individualized friendships with women.
Yes.
And then also like men, there's been studies about how if you get men together, they're more likely to talk about their external world, and women are more likely to talk about their internal world. And so I have like my friendships for that, but also as someone who has like generalized anxiety disorder, like I need people to pull me out. Like, please pull me out of my internal world. So those kinds of friendships like really valuable.
Right. Well, I remember when we met, Susanna, when we met in Sacramento, I just enjoyed asking you question after question after question, not because I was trying to do you a good and draw you out, but because I'm a curious person. And I find that sometimes people who are drawn out are just amazing individuals at their core, but you never see it because the outside is reticent, because they approach life initially in kind of a withdrawn way. But the more you ask, the more you learn, and the more the person learns about themselves. And everyone likes to learn about themselves. So it's true. It's true. There are parallels, if I might, to what you just said. I think that when I was in, grade school, I probably had as a default friendship groups that were all white, just because of the population of my school, my elementary, junior high, and high school. But I remember feeling distinctly as I approached high school that I probably had a better fit with friendship groups that were white, as opposed to perhaps those that would have been all Black from the neighboring city. And I think it's because maybe at some level, I was simply more curious and open-minded about the world. I didn't see the world as a matter of race first, Blackness first, Blackness equals oppression, nothing else matters, microaggressions, taking offense. my neural pathways had been so developed at an earlier stage in life that for me, the natural way to be in the world was a way that may not have been stereotypical Black, as it were. And so I see parallels between my racial friendship groups in junior high and high school and your male-female friendship groups in school. So I think it's an interesting parallel. So
yeah, that is interesting.
yeah. But I'm not sure where that goes, other than that. What it says is that we are most interesting the deeper we plunge into our individual selves. When we simply see ourselves as avatars for a group, when we see ourselves as some manifestation of a collective trauma, that's really a surface level understanding. It's kind of boring. It's not very deep. It doesn't get you very far. I mean, I think some of the most boring people are people who are captured by dogma and slogan words. Because when you talk about race, the conversation only goes so far. There are only like certain words one is allowed to use. Oh, Black man, historically marginalized, oppressed, white privilege. Well, you're not privileged, and she is. This is one of the reasons why, and Jen mentioned it to her credit. When we eventually started our book, I think she was captured by the idea of privilege and Black privilege versus white privilege. And I told Jen, we can't have a deep conversation if you're taking these slogan words off of the shelf. There are far more dimensions to me than quote unquote privilege, and to you too. So sadly, Susanna, I sometimes feel that we had more wisdom about race in the 1960s and 1970s than we do today. Because I think that I almost sometimes feel like a time traveler. I sometimes feel like in the age of Kendi and Robin DiAngelo, in the age of people like that my just good old small town American values and attitudes almost seem kind of quaint from a time long ago, from a past. But I think, this is my theory, what is prologue will be the future. I think that the more we go to the year 2030 and beyond, some of those values and attitudes about speaking about life openly and freely will be rediscovered. That our kids and grandkids are going to want the freedom just to talk about life. They're not going to want to be hemmed in by a set of 5 to 10 slogan words you can only use to talk about race. That's just, that's inhibiting. It's a limited life. It's a limited conversation. I think our kids are going to want to be free and rich and abundant in their curiosity. And they're going to weary of having their intellect straitjacketed. But just my thought. So, which is why I have great friendships with all people, regardless of race. And I enjoy that. And that's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing.
I think there's already such an appetite for that.
Yeah.
You know?
You see it?
Yeah.
You think it's happening?
I experienced it, right? I see it reflected in a lot of the friends that I have and the different friendships that I carry.
Right.
And I think there's also I think humor is such a good indicator. And there's just so much humor and jokes like nowadays that you probably couldn't make a few years ago. I mean, even though they are like, I don't know, not politically correct or like making fun of people on the basis of identity or stuff, like they are it is like just poking fun and teasing at the end of the day. Because when you make something so dogmatic, I mean, then the next cool thing is going to be to do the opposite.
Exactly. That's right. I like that. Exactly.
I think the humor thing, you really hit on something. I mean, we've become humorless, and people want to laugh again and have fun and be able to poke fun at themselves, I think, as well. And I think we're heading towards, Wink, this is a new word for me, the preference cascade. I think we're still
preference cascade. That's right.
Ways. But speaking of preference cascade, and this is this is going to be a whole different podcast, Susanna. But I want to touch with, I'm really interested in your history growing up Catholic and how that shaped you and how that shaped you into creating your movement around atheism. I'm doing all these podcast series around faith. I am a Christian, and we're reading this book right now by Jonathan Rauch, and he's a Jewish atheist, a gay Jewish atheist. And he wrote a book that was coming out in February that we're doing a book club on, talking about how Christianity and liberal democracy need each other. Like they need each other. And he's not a Christian, right? So he's not making the argument from a religious perspective per se.
Right.
Anyways, after that comes out, and I'll give you some of the links to that, I would love to have this conversation with you, because I wonder too, and we talked kind of about how Antifa was its own religion, if you will. And I wonder if around the atheism movement, there's a almost quote religion, if you will. I feel that one of the problems that we've had is, and one of our reasons that we have reached out to dogma, as well as other harmful things, is that we are trying to we're finding something, we've lost something, whether that's community or some. I don't know that it is that even being a Christian, I can't say that, put my finger on it and say it's the church, it's religion per se, but I feel like we're searching for something and for meaning. And so I don't know, I see, despite what Jonathan Rauch says, I actually see a resurgence in religion, at least in the churches that I go to, because I think people are like, okay, now that they're starting to critically think, going, okay, maybe it's not all that bad. Maybe it's not all that good either, but let me look again. Let me look again and see if this is a place maybe where, something that I feel has been missing. I've got many friends who have left the church for reasons that you have. And I think that those are all really, I think the church and religion, Christianity specifically, has failed people in many ways. And the way I look at faith and the way I've been talking about faith, that idea of judgment that has pushed people away is actually antithetical to what, the Bible and what Jesus would have said originally. So anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent, but I'm also kind of setting ourselves up, because I'm so fascinated with where you found a home there, that I want to take this on another podcast a little bit further with the because I see that is obviously clearly something that where you found community when there was none.
I think it's a little bit different though. So for me, even though I literally run an atheist organization, like being an atheist is not actually a super important part of my identity. For me, I got involved with this work because I care about the people who are persecuted for their non-belief. So there are many, atheist debaters where they cut their teeth on debating the God question and all of the different apologetics. And that's just not my interest. It's never been my interest. I'm not going to debate the Big Bang. I actually don't care. I actually don't care how we got here. I don't care. It doesn't affect my life. I still got to go pay my bills. You know what I mean? So for me, I got involved with it because I enjoyed the Atheist Republic community, specifically for the values we hold regarding critical thinking, inquisition, justified belief, and really, frankly, the desire to talk about what we believe to be true over what is popular, because I didn't see that a lot. I hadn't seen that a lot, and seeing people demonstrate that behavior was really attractive to me. And then just caring about the people who are literally like turned into refugees because of this barbarity. You know what I mean? But for me, I don't know. I think my atheism is like pretty simple. It's just there are certain claims that are made that I cannot get over. The idea of like prophecy, it's just, I've deconstructed it to a point where I can't make it make sense. The idea of progressive revelation, it just doesn't make sense to me. And so I can't on a personal level get over that. But I do recognize that like religion as a whole has a utility. I do think we would probably be better if we were less religious, because we would be less dogmatic. And there are certain like really harmful dogmas enshrined in religion that are way more difficult to get rid of, that are so abusive because they're religious. We have a harder time getting rid of them. You know what I mean? So I take contention with that. But at the end of the day, I know that people need a meaning making meme in their life. And that is a very solid one for most people. And I lived in San Francisco for almost a decade, and like the level of denigration of the human spirit that you see in that city is heartbreaking.
Mhm.
I mean, you go walk around, like what is it, Market and 14th? You'll be shocked to your core. You go walk around the Tenderloin, you'll be shocked to your core. And what I think about, frankly, is like old people. Like there are people past retirement age in that scenario in our country on the streets right now. And they don't have time to get it together. Let's say my life falls apart, I become a junkie tomorrow. I have time. I have time to turn things around. They don't. They don't. And can I really blame someone in that scenario for believing in a higher power and a certain story and a certain promise that was told to them when they were kids or by a pastor, and that gives them comfort and that helps them get through their day, and that helps them have less misery, and that helps them not despair? Am I gonna like wag my finger at that person and be like, oh well, the practice of logic reveals that blah blah blah? No, like I'm not gonna be like that. Or when I've traveled to developing nations and I see the conditions that other people live in, and despite the conditions that they live in, the largest, most well-preserved building in the entire area is a giant mega church. And while I kind of feel a little weird about that because the difference is so stark, am I going to act like the people living in those conditions are just so stupid and this is the opium of the masses, blah blah blah? Like, I understand that we have like very sincere psychological needs, and no matter what some like atheist figures will say, like religion is going to be what fills that inherent need in a lot of people. So it's, yeah, I don't know, that's kind of like how I cut it for myself as an individual, and then for society as a whole.
So, you are an atheist. How do you define that? How would you define your terms?
So, most people describe it as like a little quadrant. There's like Gnostic versus agnostic, and theist versus atheist. So depending on who I'm talking to or what I'm talking about, I would describe myself as an agnostic atheist.
Okay.
Because through the practice of like, logics, I'm not making a claim if I call myself an agnostic atheist. But in my day-to-day life, I'm not really an agnostic, in the colloquial term that we use it, not this technical.
Right.
I'm just someone that doesn't believe. It's a lack of a belief. For me, it's a lack of a belief. Yeah.
There are some physicists, some scientists, and these are a few, they suggest that if you look at things like quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and I'm not an expert, so I'm only going to dip my toes so much into these waters, but some thinkers and philosophers suggest that maybe it's not so much a question of whether there's a God or not, but the idea is that we could be living in some type of a simulation.
Yeah, I was just talking to my friends about this the other day. Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that, Susanna?
To be honest, sometimes I find philosophy to be so self-masturbatory it pisses me off. Like, because, okay, so basically this is kind of how I think about the question of, I don't know, you would say maybe like deism.
Yeah.
Where there's this thing that like created the universe, but now it doesn't interfere with us in any way.
Right.
And if the whole simulation thing where I'm like, does it make a difference in my life? No. It doesn't make a difference in my life.
But
Like,
suppose there's like a virus in the simulation. Suppose there's a malfunction.
Okay, well then at that point, I would have cause for concern. You know what I mean? Like, for me, the God question is, because it's not where I derive meaning. It's been a source of a lot of pain for me on a personal level. And then I was able to let go of like that burden I was talking about, that 1,000-pound backpack, when I actually started to think about it from a logical perspective. Just, this is a claim. Is there evidence for the claim that makes sense? And when I walked through it that way, that actually released me from like so much pain I was carrying, because I still treated myself like a bad kid for not following God, basically. And until I was like, wait, is there even evidence for me to treat myself bad over this thing that I'm like judging myself over? Like, maybe there isn't. Maybe, hell, hold on. So I just think, like, is this claim of this ineffable thing that doesn't intervene in my life, like it's like the magical unicorn or magical teapot. Like, is it doing anything for me? Is it intervening? No. Okay, maybe it does exist, but like, who cares? I gotta move on with my life.
Right.
I'm trying to do big things, like I don't know. Maybe I'll feel different about it later in my life. Who knows? But for me, I don't even try to think about it too dogmatically. It's just something that is difficult for me to square that circle. And yeah.
Okay.
Susanna, I know we're bumping up against our time, so I just wanted to end by saying you are a very good person. You are so
you are.
We're so grateful for you. We're so grateful for your work, your thoughts, your sharing your time and your story. I think that that's an inspiration for so many people too, who kind of feel locked into certain circles. So with that, and I think that this will be to be continued, because I love
please. That went by so fast. And can I tell you something? One more thing that I think you guys will find very interesting and appreciate.
Yes.
I got into this whole Antifa thing because I'm supposed to like fight Nazis and white supremacists, right? Okay. Because I mean, especially like the whole Berkeley Bay Area at the time, this is when like Milo Yiannopoulos, there was like people showing up, they were punching, like I've watched people get assaulted by Antifa with my own two eyes. You know, like there was real activity there.
Wow. You got street cred, by the way.
But I started to think, okay, I'm a good psychology student. I should actually go investigate, like, how did ex-Nazis or white supremacists, skinheads, like, how did they leave? And the more stories I encountered, none of them left and gave that up because they got punched in the face. None of them did.
Right.
So I was like, oh, wait a second. I might need to adjust my intervention. And what's so interesting is then, like, later in my life, after, you know, the last couple of years, everything that's happened and me being open about this part of my story, I actually had someone reach out to me that said, hi, Susanna, I was involved in right-wing extremism, and I heard you talk about how you left, what happened to you. Like, can you help me? And I think it's so interesting that it's after I left all this behind and became, you know, this like super problematic, oh my God, cancel her, you know, ostracized, you know, like girl, whatever, speaking out, that's when I was actually approached to help someone who I originally wanted to help, or those bad ideas that I wanted to combat. And I don't know, that's like a lesson I think about a lot, is it just the mirror of that expectation versus reality really stands out to me.
They say that people
get courage, and dissidents are attracted to dissidents.
Yeah.
I think sometimes if you show someone kindness, friendship, and humanity, they're far more likely to turn from their extremism than if you, as you say, punch them, or if you, for
Right,
example,
right.
belittle them or denigrate them. And people want to be recognized for their humanity.
Yeah.
And if you do that, I think you can go a long, long, long way to mitigate extremism. What is it? A little bit of honey is better than the stick, or something. I don't know what to say.
Than
It is,
vinegar. Honey
there you
attracts more
go.
flies than vinegar. That's what my
Thank-
dad would always say when I had a bad attitude.
But I think there's something to be said for that. That's what I think.
Yeah.
I love that.
So
Maybe we'll even name this podcast.
there you go.
That's lovely.
Well, on that note, Susanna, it's been such a pleasure. I look forward to the next time. Thank you.
I know, me too.
This
I
has been
missed you
good.
guys. I'll see you again
Yeah.
soon.